I have a bad sleeping habit in which I often wake up in the middle of the night at least 3 times, which isn't ideal when you have to wake up at 6 in the morning. But regardless, in some of those instances, I might be half awake, or maybe even close to 2/3 awake, in which my mind is mostly conscious, but not fully awake, which is often when I tend to have some of the more creative thoughts. One of those nights, I thought about the substitution jutsu in the Storm games. Now, I'm not gonna go full copium mode in this video. Don't take this as me expecting another Storm game or anything like that. I have no idea. That's up to Bandai Namco, not me. But I still like to entertain the idea of that because I still look back at Storm Connections, and even though I do like a lot of the changes there, one of the biggest improvements introduced there that I felt ended up getting wasted was the increased combo creativity, and a lot of that is simply due to the fact that even though Connections makes it much easier and liberating to practice combos, a lot of what you practice isn't going to pay off in real matches when your opponents have way too many ways to escape combos. Now I'll start with the most annoying way, which is summoning support characters. This I think needs to disappear. I'm honestly surprised that the game still allows you to do that when even Demon Slayer was sensible enough to not let your opponents interrupt combos, with the exception of the combo breaking mechanics, which at least costs your entire support gauge and doesn't damage you, making it a reasonably expensive tool to use. Meanwhile, in Storm, it really is just a cheap get out of jail free card. I believe if you're being damaged, you shouldn't be allowed to summon support characters, and that's a simple enough solution. Now, I think the more complicated question is what to do with the substitution jutsu. Now, in the past, I used to think that maybe they should have just reduced it to 1 or 2 subs instead of having 4, but now I have a different perspective. You see, I don't mind the substitution mechanic existing. I actually think it's what makes the Storm series unique from other fighting games. The fact that much of the neutral game revolves around trying to bait subs. Little things like how people will dash cancel, switch in the middle of a travel jutsu and chakra dash, sometimes sacrificing a sub in order to create openings, or predicting how your opponent will behave based on who has the sub advantage. A lot of it I think is pretty cool to watch, and to some degree I can accept the game having a large sub bank in order to allow people to be this creative instead of just a competition of who can chakra dash or break the guard first. But here's what I would personally suggest. We can still have 4 subs, but depending on what you're subbing out of it, the cost should be different. For example, I believe that if you've already lost a neutral game, using the substitution jutsu should cost you the whole sub gauge, meaning that it requires 4 subs to use it. That way, even if the sub gauge takes roughly the same amount of time to fully replenish as it currently is, because of the fact that you still need all 4 to be restored, and doing so will cost you the full bar, which would put you at a neutral disadvantage following this would actually reward people who train to open up opponents and practice combos. Now, to be clear, if all you're doing is subbing out of an impending attack, I think those should still cost just 1 bar. That way the baiting sub meta can still mostly exist, but if you just simply want to escape a combo after you fell a victim to an opening or a trap, those I do think should have a bigger cost. I also think this would encourage people to learn how to counter more, given how the reward would be a lot bigger than just simply using a defensive strategy like subbing, which would put you at a disadvantage neutral wise compared to before. Now of course, there are still some caveats that I'm sure many people would bring it up, so I'll start by addressing each one of them. The first one is in regards to infinites. This game, especially after Storm C, has a lot of ways to trap people in endless combo routes that are oftentimes not particularly difficult to pull off. I mean, a huge chunk of the roster had their normals updated so that some of their inputs causes the opponents to be in either a crumble or knockdown effect, which then allows you to either reset the combo or extend it with other offensive options like grabs, air attacks, or jutsu, which can then go on forever since even a lot of those options are easily cancelable. So a lot of people believe that the substitution jutsu is the ultimate way to prevent people from abusing infinites. Now, for this issue in specific, I do believe there are a couple of ways to address them. For starters, the game can either implement something that other fighting games already do, in which the longer a combo is, the shorter the stun time becomes over time. Additionally, CC2 can just simply copy what they're already doing in Hinokami Chronicles, in which combos have a timer that varies depending on what the opening attack was. The point is, it's not impossible to address the infinite problem that Storm has. It's just that for a long time, the solution has always been to just simply give the player extra get out of jail free cards, and while technically it does fix the infinite problem, it also introduces other problems. like how players end up getting get out of jail free cards whenever they lose the neutral game, and it discourages people from actually practicing creative combos. Now, another problem that Storm C arguably has, even if I personally never felt that way, but it's how a lot of people felt especially at the beginning, is that it encourages a lot of spammers, which is especially not helped by the fact that it seems like there are a lot of traveling jutsu that are armored, and some of them are pretty difficult to react. Now, that in specific, I believe, did get fixed in one of the patches in which they made them a bit easier to react to, but the underlying problem I think is still mostly there, which is that people are probably going to start spamming jutsus that are hard to react to, and there are going to be fewer ways to deal with that now that the substitution became a bit more expensive to use in general. Now, there can be a few ways to fix this, like maybe remove the armor in some of the traveling jutsu, maybe make some, if not all jutsu a bit more expensive to use, like maybe it costs a bit more chakra. It does end up becoming one of those learn once experience type of things. It could be a problem. There could be potential solutions to this, but a lot of this would have to be tested in order to be certain. Personally, I think combo timers varying depending on the opening attack like in Demon Slayer is a potential solution to this, because even if there are some jutsu that are so busted that they're both difficult to react to and can be easily extended into a combo, you just simply need to nerf their combo timers so that their combos don't last that long. However, to me, a more concerning problem that I think needs to be addressed is the fact that the game's damage scaling is kind of flawed. Now, to its credit, it exists. In other Storm games, it almost felt like there was no damage scaling, even though they technically did have. But in this game, there are still some problems, even if damage scaling has improved over the years. The big one for me is the fact that you could theoretically output about the same, if not more damage to your opponents by mostly relying on normal attacks and just simply restarting your auto combos with either knockdown stuns, jumps cancels, jutsu cancels, or even buff and debuff papers, instead of doing something more creative but more expensive like using your grabs and jutsu to extend combos. I think the damage scaling needs to be adjusted in a way where if you just keep extending combos with regular auto combo normals, the damage output should be lower. But in the current state, I just don't feel like there's a lot of push to be creative with your combos, because in general, it doesn't really pay off that much. Plus, this would probably also help alleviate some of the concerns with infinites, because to be honest, what people are mainly concerned about are infinites like the one adult Sasuke has, where he just jumps doing the universal pull and keeps doing that over and over again with no cost. If the damage scale is adjusted in a way where these kinds of cheap combo loops can have the damage output nerfed, then I think people will be less concerned about infinites being a problem, because even if they still exist, they are realistically not that viable. Now, there is another problem that I think is worth addressing, and that is the fact that substitutions, the way they work is you land right behind your opponent, which is kind of a problem because sometimes you can abuse this by subbing exactly when your opponent will be locked to an attack animation, and if you're standing right behind them, that will turn out to be a pretty easy opening for you, which I think is unfair. And I do believe that if you're already being attacked, maybe you shouldn't spawn right behind your opponent. Maybe there should be like some slight cooldown sequence on both sides in order for the neutral to be fully reset, which is how it often tends to work with other combo breaking mechanics in other fighting games. That's what I believe, at least. But anyway, those are my personal opinions. Now, I do have some extra thoughts on how I think the Storm series in general can expand the offensive options, but that will be a topic for another video. Anyway, that's all I have to share. Take care.